Whether you are white or black, if freedom and civil rights are important to you and your family, this morning's People Are Talking is just for you. Did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. die in vain 20 years ago? Had he lived, Dr. King would be celebrating his 59th birthday today. This morning we'll talk about the struggle of all minorities in the United States who also have their dreams. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to People Are Talking today. As we started on Wednesday with Virginia Graham, and we're glad that you all like the new feature, every once in a while we're going to be having a fairly regular guest co-host. This is a woman or man who is somewhat connected to a particular subject we're discussing, or just a personality in her or his own right. And our guest host today, if you'll welcome her with a round of applause, is Baltimore activist, freelance writer, Square Off panelist Madeline Murphy.
Thank you, Richard.
Delighted to see you. I know that you do wonderful interviews, and you're working on a big interview piece now for the Afro-American.
Right.
With the former chief of staff of...
Harold Washington's administration. It's quite interesting, and I think it will give a very good insight into the mayoralty here in Baltimore.
Well, we want you to give us some insight into your interviewing techniques to see how you are as a...
Oh, well.
As a talk show person, as we meet our first guest. Allow me to introduce her. Her name is Pamela Mitchell. She's the personnel assistant at WETA Television, Channel 26 in Washington, D.C. She's also a part-time employee at the Marriott Hotel at 14th and Pennsylvania Avenues in Washington, a reservation agent there. And Pamela has a story to tell about discrimination in the late 1980s. Let's welcome Pamela Mitchell to People Are Talking.
WETA is one of my favorite stations. I hate to say that, being in Baltimore with WMPT. But I would like to find out from you how this all came about. It had to do with your appearance. Is that so? And tell us what about your appearance was the altercation all about?
Well, in particular, it's about my hairstyle, my cornrow braids that I have here. What happened on early part of November, I arrived to work with my hair in cornrows. 2 days later, management approached me and told me that cornrows were not allowed. And from there, basically what they said was that this was part of the policy. This was something that has been in the role in the employee handbook for a long time.
What? That, in other words, in the employee's handbook it says no cornrows?
Right. According to them, there have been different manuals. Previous manuals stated extreme fattish hairdos are not allowed. Example, cornrows. In my particular handbook, it is not stated. They only have extreme fattish hairdos are not allowed.
Mm-hmm. What's wrong with your hair? I mean, as I look at it, I don't mind it at all. I get more talk about my hair than you, I'm sure, get about yours. But what is it about that people don't like? What does it say? Or
I guess it's part of our culture, first of all, part of my culture as a black woman. And I guess people don't understand the hairstyle.
Well, do you think that our culture is so abhorrent to white people that they would do this to you? That our culture is a kind of culture that they're not interested in forwarding, or should we all look alike?
It's probably a culture that they don't want us to express, I believe. This is something, it's a case where you have to conform to white European
but then
styles.
there's Bo Derek, and didn't Bo Derek, what did Bo Derek do with you? I read about that in the paper.
Well,
what did she say?
Basically, I heard from others that she had heard about my case and story, and that she supported me.
Well, do you think that had any effect upon what happened to you?
I do not think it had any effect at all. Basically, this was something that she wore during a movie, and I believe that's when it became a fad with the white community.
We in the white community remember that well. The movie 10.
Right.
Yes.
Y'all see that also? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did see it?
Yeah, I saw it.
When you decided to do your hair, had you seen in the manual that it said you shouldn't wear anything that was a fad? You hadn't seen that?
No, actually, I never even thought such a policy existed, such as this, so I didn't even intend on approaching the manual.
Okay, but when you decided to change your hairstyle, did you think it would create any problems?
No, I had no idea that all of this would happen.
Well, was management specific? Did it say that it was your hairstyle, that you didn't go according to code, and what are they saying now?
They told me that my hairstyle would have to be taken out because it was considered a fad.
Now,
And
what do they say now? That you're bad?
now they're saying that my particular hairstyle is acceptable, and that they've decided that other cornrow or braided styles are going to be acceptable.
In a couple of minutes, we're going to have your lawyer, Eric Steele, join you. Eric is involved in not only your case, but he was involved in the Cheryl Tatum case. He's been involved in other discrimination cases. But on this day, the 20th anniversary of the death coming up in the spring of Dr. Martin Luther King, the 59th anniversary today on this Friday of his birthday. What do you think the way management acted toward you in this incident says about, do you think there's a message there, not just from the Marriott Corporation, but an overall message? I'm going to ask you and then ask Madeline too.
The message basically is that they still have a lot to learn, first of all, and that they don't want to accept our improving of ourselves or our expanding of the black community, and we still have a long way to go in fighting this.
What do you think, Matt?
Well, I think also that it's a matter of conformity. Everybody is supposed to conform in the corporate world, and black people stand out anyway, and so they don't want black people to stand out anymore with anything different or unusual.
When you say they don't, do you think people sit down and talk about that in meetings?
Oh, surely. They talk about how many they're going to hire. They talk about what the quota system is in their particular office, what the people are supposed to look like, what positions they're supposed to take. Are they supposed to stand in front or are they supposed to be in the back? I think it's a part of management's whole method of incorporating black people into their organizations.
From a personal point of view now, after they got on you for this, how did that make you feel personally?
Well, initially I was shocked that someone would approach me over something like my hair. After that I was frustrated, angry, and this starts conflicts with you. Gosh, am I good enough, or should I be embarrassed to wear my hair in a African style such as this? It's you get a little angry when you have to be forced into a situation like that.
There were times, Richard, that there was a diner on 40th, on Route 40, and black people couldn't go in there.
The Double T, was it?
Yeah, black people couldn't go in there and eat. But then they dressed up these people like Africans. And they were welcomed, and they were brought in as if they were great potentates and that sort of thing, and they were just black people from our community. But it shows you how things shift. And I think it shows you how things shift when power is behind it, because now we're involved in South Africa, and the African plight is becoming more politically important. And so I think they're saying it in several levels. They're saying we don't want to be interested in being involved with the Africans, and we don't want to be interested in seeing black people become individuals. That the more we homogenize them here, the less problem we may have in South Africa or in Africa as a whole.
When we come back, we're going to meet your lawyer, Eric Steele, and hear about your case from a legal point of view. A little bit later in the program, you're going to meet Rabbi Donald Berlin and Senator Troy Braley as we continue to look at how blacks and whites and other minorities are interacting on People Are Talking. We'll be right back.
When I say don't be afraid, you know what I really mean. Don't even be afraid to die. But I submit to you tonight, no man is free. If I would be pleased to give you a blueprint for freedom in Birmingham tonight, I would say first that at this moment we must decide that we will no longer spend our money in businesses that discriminate against Negroes.
Madeline, let me ask you, then I'm going to introduce Eric, why this show, in your opinion, is important, not only for blacks, but for whites, and for everyone in our community to watch.
Because I think it gives insights into each other. You can't very well talk about stereotypes in a vacuum. You have to confront people with the stereotypes so that they will understand where their racism is coming from. And it would demonstrate, just like Gorbachev and Reagan, like anything else, that only when we communicate with each other are we able then to overcome some of our prejudices and understand them, or maybe reinforce them if you take the chance.
All right, Eric Steele is a labor lawyer in Washington, D.C. He is part of Connerton, Ray, and Simon. Is that right?
That's correct.
The firm over there. He's handled a variety of anti-discrimination cases. He claims that 25 to 30% of his law practice is based on discrimination cases. And let's welcome Eric to the show. I want to get back to Pam's story in a moment, but how much discrimination is out there? How many people need help?
Unfortunately, discrimination in 1988 is perhaps even more flagrant than it was when the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is the primary federal law which bars discrimination, was passed. What has happened in Ms. Mitchell's case and other cases I've found is that it has become more subtle. That's the only difference. Unfortunately, it is widespread.
Give me some examples. There's a case
where
how subtle can it be? Well, this one wasn't terribly subtle in Pamela's case.
Well, it's subtle in the sense that 20 years ago they said we'll have no blacks, we'll have no Negroes or whatever. Now they never raised. I mean, if you ask the Marriott today if this was a race issue, they say no, this is a grooming issue. We just don't want people to wear cornrows. Of course, the problem with that is only African American women wear cornrows. There are other cases.
And Bo Derek.
Okay. whose career has probably been bolstered by all this because it's the first time her name's been mentioned in 6 years. But
even in this studio,
or anywhere else,
I know some guys who mention it on a fairly regular basis. But anyway, go on.
Touché.
But the problem is that there's a lot of, outside of this context with anti-braids discrimination. I have one case, for example, where there's a woman who works for a computer company, and she happens to be one of the top salespersons for this computer company. And this black woman has won awards from the computer company, and she's in their particular excellence programs for just selling just tons of computer equipment. The problem is that the computer company never pays this black woman at the top salary. It always pays her even below the scale salary. And
do they pay white women at the same scale?
Oh, they pay white. They pay all the other employers higher than they pay the one employee who's their top sales performer, not only in their office but around the country. So what I'm finding in a lot of my cases is that you have a lot of clients like Ms. Mitchell and others who are very well qualified and have no problems in their performance, but despite all of that, are still facing job discrimination.
Well, I think that's because you may have antagonism from other workers who are white, who don't want that person to be in the job, and they have a friend or an associate or anybody who they would rather fill because they're uncomfortable with black people in positions equivalent to theirs.
You're absolutely right, but that, of course, that is still just base discrimination. I mean, that's of course what the struggle was about in the 60s and the 70s, that you just can't select people because you know them or they look like you or you feel comfortable with them. You have to start measuring people's qualities and opportunities based on their abilities.
All right, Pamela, back to your story. So you decided, you started there, you had a jerry curl. How long ago did you start at the...
I started there last February.
And you had a jerry curl. Did you say anything about that at the time?
No problem at all.
All right, so then you decided to change your hairstyle, and you did. What did management do? How did they let you know they didn't like the way your hair looked?
They approached me as I was coming into work that particular evening, and stated to me that these weren't allowed. It's in the handbook. You would have to take them out. You're not reimbursed. And
you're not reimbursed.
Meaning, I asked the question, well, would I be reimbursed if I had these taken out? And they said no.
If they said yes, would you have had it done?
I'm not sure. At the time, I probably would have, but when I thought about it more and more, I realized that this was something discriminatory going on here.
It takes a lot of courage to stand up to your rights, especially if you need the job and like the job.
Let me say, this is a national problem. We have a great number of black women all around the country who have lost their jobs, lost promotions because they decide to wear this hairstyle or other African-inspired hairstyles. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is that you have many other black women, and perhaps the majority, who said they would, at least on occasion, if not all the times, wear this type of hairstyle, but they're afraid of what their employers are going to do.
So after they told you they didn't like it, did they say you change it or you're fired, or did they warn you, or what?
Well, what happened, I sat down in a meeting with the front office manager and front division manager, and I was given a memo, 30-day memo, basically
like
stating,
a warning.
Yeah, stating that at the end of the 30 days, I would have to have my hair out.
Shampoo or ship out, right?
Right, or one of the alternatives was to wear a wig.
Oh,
And,
they told you that? That's very nice.
Yes, very nice. And or I would have to be terminated if I didn't have my braids out.
And you touched on how you felt. As you kept going through this, how did you really feel inside? Was there any sort of a lack of self-image or what?
I think my self-image became stronger basically because they were trying to take that away from me, it seemed like, you know, by telling me to take out this hairstyle and, you know, putting me through all of these conflicts just didn't help, and I, you know, became a little bit more angrier. So, you know, at the end of the 30 days, what they did was sat down with me at a meeting again, follow-up meeting. This was 2 of them. This time, one other person from the Human Resource office.
Both white, just out of curiosity?
No, actually, the Human Resource person was black. I was given a first warning, written warning that is, and sent home. I had to report back 3 days later with my hair out, or I would be given a second warning. I reported back, still had my hair in braids, and I was told again I would get a third warning and suspended pending termination 3 days later. So the third time I came back, they told me that they weren't going to suspend me or terminate me, but they were going to have corporate or management discuss this issue, and they would get back with me, which they did. And
by this time, had you gotten a lawyer?
I had gotten a lawyer in the beginning, basically, after the first meeting.
How'd you meet up with Eric? From the other case?
I had heard about the other case, and I looked him up.
All right, and the Cheryl Tatum case was basically?
Cheryl Tatum case is very similar. That's against the Hyatt Regency Crystal City in Northern Virginia. There, they terminated Ms. Tatum in September of 1986 because she came in with a very attractive cornrow hairstyle, and she refused to take her hair out, and they said, well, you know, either my way or the highway. And that's what happened with her. And ultimately, we brought an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint against the Hyatt Regency, and it is still pending, and we expect a decision there within the next couple of weeks.
Do you think that these 3 days, 3 times of warnings had a lot to do with the fact that they knew you had a lawyer, and they knew you had a lawyer who had another successful case, and they were trying to bully you?
I think what happened was the publicity that I got.
Oh, I see.
Helped me out a lot, as well as you know, the lawyer here. But I think the publicity and the support. How did the publicity
come about, though?
Well,
tell us about that.
Well, we got in contact with the press because we thought that the press and the public would be interested to know that a local employer was engaging in these type of practices. And I can say that in Washington and the surrounding area, everybody was outraged because there's, you know, her hairstyle is lovely, and there's no non-racial reason for discriminating against this woman.
Before we stop and bring on the other guests, I just want to ask you, where's your case right now? You still have your lawyer, you're still on the job. Why don't you just forget about it?
Well, the case has to continue because there still has to be a finding of discrimination on behalf of Ms. Mitchell.
Are you looking for money in that?
Well, ultimately, there's going to have to be some form of compensation for Ms. Mitchell and for all the other women who've been affected by it. This was a national policy by this particular employer.
What kind of a case is this worth in terms of dollars? I know.
I couldn't hazard to say in dollars, but let me just say in terms of the human value that we're talking about at this particular employer, I'm sure hundreds of black women. And across the country, we're talking about thousands, if not more, of being and having this problem of being unable to go into corporate America with a neat, well-groomed, African-inspired hairstyle. That's just rank and naked discrimination.
Is there anything that black guys do that annoy employers in terms of the way they would look?
Often wearing beards because there's a certain misconception that this is just too militant or it is too aggressive and they don't want black men to wear beards. I wear a beard. I like wearing a beard. I don't know if it's a statement of militancy or not, but I'm not going to shave it off.
If you'll allow me to get a razor and some shaving cream for you, we'll be right back in just a moment.
Oh, come on, Richard.
And you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stands, never quite knowing what to expect next.
You can never whip these birds if you don't keep you and them separate. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
We wonder what State Senator Troy Braley feels when he sees a soundbite like that. Senator Braley, a state senator for 6 years, a Maryland lawmaker for a total of 22 years, joining us now, as is Rabbi Donald Berlin from Temple Oheb Shalom, who is a crusader for civil rights in this community and the immediate past president of a coalition in the community called BLUES, standing for Blacks and Jews, black people and Jewish people trying to work and live together. We'd like to welcome the senator and the rabbi to our show. Senator, what do you think when you see something like that? You got to keep the blacks away from the whites.
Keeping away from the lights?
No, not keeping away from the whites. The soundbite that you just saw, where the man was saying you must keep blacks and whites separate.
Well, I don't believe in keeping them separate. You know, I came up on the A. Philip Randolph, and my motto has always been, I'm heart and soul for blacks, but I'm not against whites.
Rabbi, what do you think of that, of this case here, Pamela's case? You've been watching it in the back. Do you think it represents subtle discrimination still existing in our society, or do you think there's been some significant progress made over the past 20 years?
Well, I think it does represent a not so subtle discrimination, may I add. We have a concept in American life about living in a very a deep sense of conformity in a lot of different ways, and I could identify with it in one respect. I was trying to imagine somebody, for example, who is Jewish and perhaps wore a long beard and was put in the position of either being able to do his job adequately or facing dismissal. And I think that anyone who's somehow not in keeping with what someone else's view is of what the general group should look like.
But you see Jewish people working now with yarmulkes,
right,
which was not a thing that we saw in prior times because they kept their religion to themselves. But now, because of all of the newer identification, they use the yarmulke, and I don't think that's too much different as a racial designation than cornrows.
You're absolutely right, but those people did not necessarily keep that religion to themselves. They were given no opportunity in the past. I think we now have laws on the books that protect their right to be able to wear the yarmulke, which is exactly what you've been saying.
Right, right.
And that's one of the pluses in the last 20 years. And, we're talking about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, and it's the ability that we have to promote, in my mind, America's greatest strength. It's cultural pluralism. And whether you're wearing a yarmulke or wearing a beard, wearing cornrow, all of it enhances and enriches that cultural diversity, which I think is, one of the strongest basic fibers of the society.
Let me ask Senator Braley, how far do you think situation has come for blacks and minorities since the days of Dr. Martin Luther King, with whom you were friends? You were active in the civil rights movement back in the 1960s. You were the Maryland chairman of the 63 March on Washington. You've, from your vantage point, how have things developed, do you think?
I don't think blacks have gained that much as far as civil rights are concerned. I think one of the things that we don't talk about that much, we talk about, we don't talk about the high rate of unemployment among blacks. I would say that the unemployment rate among blacks, and especially young blacks, are as high as it was back 20 years ago. And maybe with the grown-up blacks, do with the plant closings and all of this, because blacks were always the last hired and the first fired because we were on the end of the seniority list. And when they get ready to lay off, they lay off blacks first. So we have not gained anything, I don't believe, as far as jobs in the last 20 years. I might state, however, that I read an article a few weeks ago where they said that unemployment among blacks in management has increased threefold. But I just heard the young lady state that the person who suspended her was a black manager.
Well, she wasn't actually suspended, but you were telling us that the human resources manager was black, and your boss was also black.
Well, the general manager is black, but I never dealt with the general manager doing any of these meetings. The management that I dealt with were white.
Let me just jump in here quickly.
Please,
I mean, though they were black and they may or may not have played an active role in this policy, in her instance it was a national policy, but I think that what it bespeaks is that you need more blacks coming into corporate America and really serving as the conscience for corporate America so they can go in and ameliorate and soften or just come right out and change these type of policies which are discriminatory.
I would say though that blacks coming into management, when you come into management, you represent management. You're on the other side of the fence.
Well, you're absolutely right, but you can represent management without promoting discrimination. And in fact, it's in the ultimate long-range benefit of management not to be discriminatory. That's what I would contend.
All right, we've got a lot of people here that have comments. Come on, gotta get up. You were telling me, we were talking about discrimination before the show, that when you were younger, a few years back, there were some problems in department stores, and that's what you still remember. How many years ago do you think that was?
Well, it was a while back. But when I was growing up, blacks were not allowed in any department store at all in Baltimore City, except for the small stores, no large stores. And I went to Ann Lewis, which is one store I remember. This was a very mediocre store. And my mother was with me. And mother said, we'd like to try this on. And the lady said, you can try on anything, referring to mother, but I couldn't try on anything in that store. And it happened that my mother was fair, and she ended up really shopping for the people in the neighborhood because we did not have access to the
she went in to pass as a non-black, is that?
Yes, for the neighbors. There were a number of people who did that in our community. A number of people.
Right. This was a service thing because we just weren't able to get into the stores.
Did you want to say something also?
No, I was saying what Reber has said is really true because there were those of us who are of the darker complexions. When we tried to try on clothes, particularly I experienced in Stewart's, they told me that I just couldn't try it on, and I was so vexed I never went back to Stewart's again.
You know, there used to be a community, I'll get to you, a community swimming pool in Baltimore. It used to have a sign outside that said no Jews or dogs allowed.
Yes, I remember that.
I won't mention this.
Well, the only thing was, though, in this instance, there was a cottage industry that grew to magnificent proportions. There was a store named Schleissner, and Schleissner dealt with black people only. And it had the area like you were going into a very ritzy designer shop, and all the clothes were behind mirrors. And you would tell them what you wanted, and you'd sit in a banquette in the middle of the floor, and they'd bring it out to you, and they'd say to you, well, now this is an exclusive, and this is an original, and you won't see yourself. Well, my dear, I went to a dance with one of those exclusive dresses and saw 3 more like it. But this man made millions of dollars off of segregation, and this is what happened also, and this is what cut it in half, the idea of doing anything about it.
We also couldn't eat. I was a pioneer in the civil rights movement with sit-ins and demonstrations and so forth. But we couldn't eat in any store, and I used to tell my students before I retired as an educator that we couldn't do this, that, and the other. So we really fought in order that we have the privileges now for young people.
When we come back, why don't we talk about education and employment, and we'll do that after this. Discussing this morning on People Are Talking where blacks and other minorities have come and gone in the past 20 years since the assassination this coming April of Dr. Martin Luther King, who would have been 59 years old today. And Rabbi Berlin, you had a point that you wanted to make, taking all of this in?
Well, the point I wanted to make was that I would agree that there are certainly a lot of limitations in terms of progress, but there are some acknowledgments of progress that I think have to be made as well. And certainly in the late 50s or early 60s, there were very grave discriminations that existed in this country between blacks and whites. And I grew up in Canada. And when I was a college student, I had the opportunity to work as a sleeping car porter during the summertime. And while I was reading editorials...
I never knew that about you.
No, you didn't know that about me. While I was reading editorials in our own Canadian newspapers about the terrible things that are going on in the American South and the treatment of blacks, I was meeting black sleeping car porters who were college graduates, who were engineers, who were architects, and who could not find employment in their particular field. So that was my first sensitizing to the political plight.
Yes.
You mentioned swimming pools, and I remembered when I was a student at rabbinical school in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the early 1960s, going to the swimming pool there, the big public swimming pool, and they would not sell a ticket to go swimming to a black person, and we rabbinic students would stand behind them in line and would not allow them to sell us a ticket until they sold a ticket, and after a period of time, doing this for a period of time, there was an effort to desegregate. I also was surprised going to the local little restaurant near my seminary. We took one of our medical students who lived in the dorm with us, and he was unable to be served with us. We didn't know that he couldn't be served there, and again, we got the whole student body involved in that particular effort. So I think that there has been, in the area of the segregation of peoples, some kinds of things. There was legislation, there were laws. You talk about the economy, and you talk about the economic level, that's another level.
That's right.
But I think you have to give credit to certain areas in the political and social structure that have changed, that have allowed managers to appear with corporations, albeit there is discrimination, there is racism, and we have to acknowledge it. And I fear sometimes that we act as though no change has happened whatsoever, and that we may be delivering a message of hopelessness.
I think there have been subtle changes, and then there has been subtle continuation of racism that we find on all levels, no matter where we go, because you can go into a restaurant right now as a black person and be sat by the kitchen door, or you have to make a great deal of fuss about it before you find the same kind of accommodation that somebody else would have. In motels on the road, I have experienced it, that the whole floor had been rented out to black people, and there was no convention.
Well, as we were discussing in the green room, had it not been for some of the efforts of you and many other people in the past, I would not have been able to have become an attorney, because coming from a poor black working class family, those type of opportunities simply did not exist. And one of the things that needs to be focused on is that because of the results of the civil rights movements of the 60s and 70s, many people, black and white, were able to aspire and go on to higher education, when in the past they were not.
All right. You got a comment out here, ma'am?
Yes, I'd like to relate 3 incidences very quickly. The first one was when I was prepared for sociology with early in my career. I received a telegram 6 o'clock one evening to apply for a job with the Department of Social Services. I appeared, and when I appeared, it was very obvious, because I was black, that I was told that 8 o'clock the next morning the job had been filled by someone within the department. The agency did not open until 8:30. My second experience was with Social Security. When I went there with a college degree, I was placed in a very menial job. I was very shocked to find out that there were many, many college graduates sitting there who had been grade 2s and 1s and 2s for a period of 10 years. I, being very aggressive, refused to stay there. My third situation was the Department of Education, when there were jobs which were available, but because other persons weren't aggressive, and I would visit the Department of Education to find out that there were jobs available which blacks did not know about. I was placed in a job. I was the only black woman there, and I must also speak, Senator Braley may have forgotten this, but 3 years ago, you helped me with a young woman who was refused to give a job at the State Department as a right-of-way agent. Right. I came to you, and you helped me when we went over, and the young woman was not given the job because not only was there not any black persons in that as a right-of-way agent, but there were no black women and no black men. All the persons who held those jobs were black or white men. She is now in the job. She is an acting supervisor. You may not know that. And there have been 3 black persons who've been placed in that job as a result of your help.
Senator,
so
let
thank
me,
you so much.
congratulations. Yeah, you're welcome. Let me ask you, how influential do you think you and other black lawmakers have been over the past 10 or 15, 20 years to change the way most people look at blacks and minorities?
Well,
how influential is your influence?
My influence?
Yours and black lawmakers in general.
I think black lawmakers, you know, have made a change. But I want to mention this. You have to be free. First of all, you have to be free to put pressure on people. You see, if I have been in the legislature for 24 years, and I don't sell tickets to businesses because they will call on you. It's not that I'm opposed to businesses, but I want to be free to vote on what I think is right. And just like going into these places, just like this place right here, Channel 13, I called the general manager one day and I said to him, I want to come out and see you. And he said, okay. When I got there, when I got here, he said, what do you want to talk about? I said, don't you think it's time to hire some black news casters here? I said, you don't think the time is right? And the gentleman hired Wally Daniels in this station. And I used to have meetings with the other radio stations or TV stations. And you see the number of blacks that we have, and we see the job that they're doing. They call blacks back then, they said, well, they're disc jockeys. They don't know how to give the news, so they set up and they applaud and they shake their heads. But you see they're doing a good job, but it had to be pressure. Now, let's say, for example, had I been taking funds from Westinghouse, I couldn't come out and pressure the people. And this is what I've done. And I think that one thing about blacks and why we have not made the progress that we should have made, because it's economic pressure. If you don't have the funds, we are being held back economically. And this is why you cannot do certain things. And I want to just say a little joke about one of our good friends in Annapolis who was Jewish, and we were legislators together and talking about, who mentioned about the swimming pool? You?
I did, but that's irrelevant. Go on. Go ahead.
Well, this Jewish legislator was a friend of mine, and he put in a bill about, I assume, that same swimming pool. So he was explaining the bill, and I was sitting next to him, and he, while he was explaining it, he kept pointing, had his hand on my shoulder, and said, my black friend cannot go into this swimming pool. So we were friends. I said, don't say it about me. I said, you can't go in there either. So, that's what it is. It's economics.
All right, why don't we
stop? Is it only
for
economics?
What, sir?
Is it only economics?
All right, let's leave it on that question. We'll come back in a moment. The question is it only economics? And we'll talk about that in just a moment on People Are Talking.
I have the great honor on behalf of the Nobel Committee to hand over to you the insignia of the Nobel Peace Prize, the diploma, and the gold medal. Thank you very much.
Madeline?
I think that when you begin to talk about economics, however, you have to talk about the educational system. One feeds into the other. I hate the idea of saying that we're going to educate all these kids, and then for what? Are there any jobs available? Are there any other things that they can do? And the one thing about the education system that I am very concerned about is the lack of self-motivation and motivation, because I think busing has been a blessing and a curse. For the reason, I've done interviews with people who become engineers, who worked in very high areas in their jobs and have gone off on their own. And their main statement is that the black teacher was their motivation. That they were in segregated situations, but the black teacher infiltrated some education into their lives about their own race and what their own race had done.
That's exactly what I meant when I called out to you, is it only economics? I think that there are motivations. Martin Luther King, whose birthday we're celebrating today, was a very prime example of being able to confront the system. I think we have to give, it's a given. The system is partly, it has a racist bent. It has discrimination, not only to blacks, but to other minority groups. And my point is that I think what we have to do is perhaps fight against it being a continuous given, but at the same time to be able to be motivated to respond to it and do what we have to do.
Well, the important thing in terms of education is that if you have people being educated, they will not discriminate against black women, for example, who wear cornrows. The whole question, and also if you have people who have education, they may not go and put drugs in their veins or commit crimes. They have a certain sense of self. So as was stated already, while the economics is important, because obviously people must be able to live viable existences. However, they have to have a certain sense of self and their neighbors and how all this whole world fits.
But they have to have a road, they have to have a bridge to get to the economics.
Surely.
And the bridge that gets them to economics is education.
Surely, because for black individuals, they're going to need those teachers, and they're going to need heroes like Dr. Martin Luther King, or like Jesse Jackson, or like dozens of others, because we need that type, or like Harold Washington, because we need that type of motivation in our community.
Well, go ahead, Senator.
Well, what it is, we have people that are qualified, but they'll go down and apply for jobs, and they're turned down. You see, and you talk about putting drugs in your veins and so forth. When these young people go down and they apply for jobs and they're turned down and they feel that they have nowhere to go, they're qualified.
You're absolutely right, because many of them are my clients. And what we need to do, at least it's my job to do it to a certain extent, is we need to confront these type of employers who are going to engage in any type of discriminatory practices. But we also need to do some things in our community as well. So we have to be confronting the system from within and without, and we have to be doing some things in our own community to hope and get ready for the turn of the century.
Pamela, we're talking about young people and education. You haven't talked for a while. What do you think about everything that's being said?
Well, basically, having gone to 2 white institutions, undergraduate degree is from University of Virginia, and my graduate is from University of Southern California. And you have to, as a black student there, you found yourself having to prove that you can do the work, and that you can stand up against your white counterpart and do the same thing. And then when you go out into the work world, it's hard, to get positions, and just see someone and who has a degree the same as yours get a position just like that, because of their race, sort of frustrates you. And discrimination is still going on, within the educational institutions.
Yeah, but I think also that regardless of where you go to college or what you do, you cannot work on it by yourself in a vacuum. You've got to get the private sector that they're always bragging about to begin to turn around in its attitude, as well as the public sector, because I know there's a lot of discrimination in federal jobs. And then we have got to begin to talk to black people about entrepreneurship. going into business for themselves. I interviewed a man who started a bus company with $10,000 from his mother and his automobile and went around from city to city, black man, to sell this concept of a smaller bus because of the streets in Houston that you couldn't turn in. And now he's got $1 million business, couple $1 million business. But he still has problems with capitalization. He still has problems that white people don't have, even in his own business. So we've got to address it front on all areas of racism.
All right, we'll be back in just a moment. Hold on just a moment, Eric. We'll be right back to wrap all of this up into one neat little package. Stay with us.
Richard's Wardrobe provided by J.S. Edwards Limited. Fine men's clothing in the Hilton Inn Plaza, Pikesville.
Your point, please.
We have discussed many things here that support racism, but one of the biggest things that induces and support racism is housing patterns, and we have said nothing about that.
And in a sentence, what can you say about it? Because we're a little short on
I
time.
can say that housing is segregated, and there will never be integration until there, and there'll never be decent education until we do have integrated housing. And let me tell you, it's not only the rich fleeing to the counties, but in our own public housing, the poorest of people, there is discrimination. Some of those projects were just for white people.
Right.
You all agree with that?
Yes, I agree with it. I know that for a fact.
Hold on.
Yes.
I believe you. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I know that for a fact. And I think when you talk about housing, you talk about also what are we going to do with the large number of homeless people who have no place to go, or the people who've been put out of work and have no real place to live after they can't pay their rent, or the place is changed into condominiums, they don't have the rent.
I want to thank all of you for being with us today. People are talking on this, the 59th birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. I guess we'll be talking about this in 10 more years, too. And wasn't Madeline a fabulous call?
Oh, thank you.
We may have you back. You're very good. I'm sure our viewers enjoyed having you, and I always do. And Madeline and I and our panel leave you with these words from Dr. Martin Luther King. And have a good weekend. Bye-bye.